The Legend of Zelda has produced some of the most iconic villains in gaming history. From bumbling cult leaders obsessed with fruit to ancient demonic gods whose curses span thousands of years, the range is genuinely absurd. So today, we're breaking down every single Zelda antagonist and everything that makes them tick, starting with the one who fights you while eating a banana. Master Koga. Master Koga is the self-proclaimed leader of the Yiga clan, a rebel splinter faction of the Sheikah who decided that serving Ganon was a better career path than protecting Hyrule. The Yiga clan originally split from the Sheikah after feeling betrayed by the royal family, which makes their grudge at least somewhat understandable. Not that Koga himself radiates centuries of righteous fury energy, but here's the thing, nobody cares about his backstory. Because Master Koga is, without question, the funniest antagonist in Zelda history. His primary motivation isn't world domination, or revenge, or ancient prophecy. It's bananas. The man is obsessed with mighty bananas. You can literally lure his entire clan into traps, using them as bait, and Koga keeps a personal stash in his hideout. He's a villain motivated primarily by snack hoarding, and the game plays it entirely for laughs. Then Tears of the Kingdom comes along and somehow escalates the bit. Koga returns across multiple encounters in the depths, piloting increasingly ridiculous Zonai contraptions. He went from bumbling cult leader to bumbling mech pilot. His boss fights get progressively more elaborate, and he gets progressively more annoyed that you keep showing up. It's genuinely endearing. Fans still debate whether his levity undermines the Yiga clan as a threat or makes them infinitely more memorable. The answer is obviously both, but if you think a banana-hoarding goofball in a construct suit is strange, wait until you meet the antagonist, who's literally just you. Dark Link. Most of Ganon's weapons make sense. Giant monsters, cursed armies, ancient demons, stuff you can point a sword at and feel good about killing. But his single cruelest creation isn't a monster at all, it's you. Dark Link first appears in Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link as the final boss, a shadow version of yourself guarding the Triforce of Courage. But his most iconic appearance is in Ocarina of Time, deep inside the Water Temple. If you've played it, you already felt your blood pressure spike. The fight takes place in a massive room filled with shallow water stretching in every direction, with reflections playing absolute tricks on your depth perception. It's disorienting by design, and then your shadow peels off the ground and starts swinging. Here's the thing about Dark Link, he mirrors your sword techniques, your exact timing. Every move you've learned, he already knows. He'll jump on your blade and counter you if you swing predictably, which means the game is literally telling you the only way to beat yourself is to stop fighting like yourself, which is, not ideal when you've spent 20 hours building muscle memory. But the real horror isn't the mechanics, it's the lore. Dark Link has no memory, no will, no identity beyond being your reflection. He isn't evil by choice because he doesn't have the capacity to choose anything. Ganon didn't send a warrior after you. He sent a mirror, and mirrors don't think. They just copy. He reappears across multiple titles, and every time, the same debate reignites. Is Dark Link conscious? Is there something behind those empty eyes? Or is he just a magical puppet wearing your face? Nobody has a definitive answer, and honestly, that's the scariest part. But if fighting a hollow version of yourself sounds unsettling, wait until you meet the guy who turns people into paintings. Kirahim. Most Zelda villains want to destroy the world, or rule it, or whatever. Kirahim just wants his boss to notice him, and honestly, that makes him way more unsettling. Skyward Sword's primary antagonist isn't some ancient evil lurking behind a seal. He's a flamboyant, sardonic, deeply theatrical swordsman who fights you 3 separate times across the entire game and gets progressively more furious each time you beat him. He doesn't monologue about darkness or chaos. He monologues about how annoyed he is. He licks his lips. He snaps his fingers. He tells you exactly how he's going to take you apart, and then he tries to do it with visible personal investment. Here's the thing about Girahim that separates him from every other antagonist on this list. His motivation isn't power, it's devotion. He serves Demise, the Demon King, with a loyalty so intense it borders on anguish. When Demise is threatened, Girahim doesn't strategize. He panics. He rages. He becomes genuinely desperate. This is a villain who loves his master more than he loves himself, which is saying something because he loves himself a lot. But the real twist is what Girahim actually is. He's not a demon who carries a sword. He is a sword. His true form is a blade, the dark counterpart to the Master Sword itself. Fi is the spirit of the hero's blade. Girahim is the spirit of the Demon Kings, a weapon that somehow developed a personality, vanity, frustration, and the capacity for genuine suffering. That's the tragedy nobody talks about. Girahim is a tool that thinks it's a person. He has feelings, ambitions, theatrical flair for days, and at the end of it all, he's still just a piece of metal in someone else's hand. But if you think a sentient sword with an ego problem is strange, wait until you meet the king who was never supposed to be one. Zant. When Zant first appears in Twilight Princess, he is genuinely one of the most terrifying things the Zelda franchise has ever produced. He walks into Hyrule Castle's throne room, radiating this cold, calculated authority that makes every other villain in the series feel like they're playing dress-up. His helmet obscures his face. His movements are deliberate. He speaks like someone who has already won. And for a solid chunk of the game, you believe him. He earns that fear too. This is the guy who plunges Hyrule into twilight, commands an army of shadow beasts across dozens of encounters, and forcibly transforms Link into a wolf against his will. Not a curse you can break with a side quest, an involuntary, humiliating transformation that strips you of everything. Zant doesn't just threaten the world, he personally diminishes the hero. But here's where it gets devastating. The deeper you go into Twilight Princess, the more Zant starts to crack. That composed, authoritative figure begins twitching, flailing. His boss fight has 7 distinct phases, and each one is more unhinged than the last. He stops fighting like a king and starts fighting like a child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. By the final phase, he's literally spinning around screaming, and then the truth drops. Zant's power was never his. Every ounce of authority, every shadow beast, every terrifying moment he created was borrowed directly from Ganondorf. He was a puppet, a vessel, a nobody who was handed a crown and told to wear it until the real king was ready. Midna dismisses him as pathetic, weak, and honestly, she's not wrong, but the fan community has never fully agreed on that reading. Some see Zant as irredeemable, a power-hungry coward who sold his realm to a demon. Others see tragedy, a broken man who wanted recognition so badly he let something ancient and evil hollow him out completely. Either way, Zant is a masterclass in building someone up just to tear them apart. But if you think a puppet king is unsettling, wait until you meet the Wind Mage who stole his own immortality. Vaati. Every other villain on this list was either born into darkness, cursed into it, or literally created as a weapon of evil. Vaati looked at power, decided he wanted it, and stole it with his own 2 hands. That makes him something rare in this franchise, a self-made monster. Here's the thing, Vaati started life as a Minish. For those unfamiliar, the Minish are tiny creatures, roughly the size of a thumb, living in a microscopic world hidden beneath Hyrule. Adorable, harmless, the kind of species you'd put on a greeting card. And one of them woke up one day and chose violence on a civilizational scale. Originally an apprentice to the sage Eslo, Vaati became obsessed with the darkness in human hearts and the power he could extract from it. So he stole Eslo's magical cap, an artifact capable of granting wishes, and used it to transform himself from a tiny Minish into a powerful sorcerer, and eventually a full-blown wind demon with shape-shifting abilities and devastating magic. He went from the size of a rice grain to threatening all of Hyrule. That's not a career change, that's a species upgrade. But here's where it gets interesting. Cosmically, Vaati is nowhere near the heavyweights. He's not Demise, he's not Ganondorf. He doesn't carry a primordial curse or command armies of ancient evil. And yet he spans 3 entire games as the primary antagonist. The Minish Cap, 4 Swords, and 4 Swords Adventures. The 4 heroes of legend had to seal him inside the 4 sword, and even that didn't stick permanently. He kept coming back. Centuries passed, kingdoms rose and fell. Vaati was still in there, waiting. The fandom loves to argue about where he ranks against the big names, and honestly, the answer depends on what you're measuring. Raw power, he loses. Sheer stubborn refusal to stay sealed, he's unmatched. Nobody in this franchise clawed their way from nothing to near godhood through pure ambition the way Vaati did. Which is impressive until you meet the villain who didn't need ambition at all, because he was literally designed as evil's sword, Twin Rova. This is where the list starts getting genuinely uncomfortable. Not because Kume and Kotaka are powerful, though they absolutely are, but because what happens to them during their boss fight is one of the most disturbing things Nintendo has ever put in a game. On the surface, they seem almost comical. Twin Gerudo sorceresses, one controls fire, the other controls ice, and they've been around for centuries serving as surrogate mothers to Ganondorf. They rule over the Spirit Temple, they cackle like cartoon witches, and they bicker constantly. Standard villain fare, nothing to lose sleep over. But then they merge. Here's where it gets genuinely visceral. When you push them far enough, Kume and Kotak fuse into a single body. Not a cooperative fusion where 2 minds work in harmony. A forced combination where both personalities are crammed into one form. You can see it in the design. You can feel it in the way the fight changes. 2 women shoved into a body that doesn't belong to either of them, lashing out with combined fire and ice magic that shifts between elements, like the 2 halves can't agree on how to kill you. That's body horror in a Nintendo game in the late 90s, and the thing nobody can agree on is what they actually are. The games never fully explain their nature. They're Gerudo, supposedly, but they've lived for around 400 years. Normal Gerudo don't do that. Some fans argue they're demon hybrids. Others think they're corrupted mortals sustained by dark magic. Official sources keep it deliberately vague, and their appearances across multiple timeline branches only make the confusion worse. Their exact relationship to Ganondorf shifts depending on which game you're playing. Are they his mothers? His handlers? His creators? Nobody knows for certain, and honestly, I don't think Nintendo does either. But at least Twin Rova chose to serve evil. The next entry on this list didn't get that luxury. Skull Kid. Here's the thing about Skull Kid. He's not evil. He's not scheming. He's not trying to conquer anything or destroy anyone. He's a lonely kid from the woods who made the mistake of picking up something he didn't understand, and it ate him alive from the inside out. You first meet him in Ocarina of Time, and he's basically harmless. A little troublemaker hanging out in the Lost Woods, playing music, being weird. He's got this strange connection to the forest and its creatures, and he seems like nothing more than a footnote. A quirky NPC you bump into and forget about. Then Majora's Mask happens. By the time that game starts, Skull Kid has already stolen and put on Majora's Mask, an ancient artifact so powerful it doesn't even need a body to destroy the world. It just needs a host, and it found the perfect one. Not because Skull Kid was strong, because he was sad. Because his friends, the four giants, had left him behind to guard the four regions of Termina. Because he was alone and desperate for connection, and that desperation made him vulnerable to something ancient and terrible. And that's what makes this one hurt. Skull Kid had friendships, real ones. He bonded with Toddle and Tull. He played songs in the forest. He wasn't some hollow vessel waiting to be filled with darkness. He was a person, and the mask stripped all of that away, puppeted his body, used his grief as fuel, and nearly dropped the moon on an entire civilization. The game confirms it. Once the mask is removed, Skull Kid is just a scared, confused creature who doesn't fully understand what happened. He's a victim, canonically, unambiguously a victim. He even shows up in Twilight Princess, still wandering, still existing like some eternal lost child the universe refuses to let go of. No grand ambitions, no master plan. Just a kid in the woods who got used by something far bigger than himself. But if Skull Kid represents what happens when evil finds an unwilling host, the next entry shows what happens when it finds a willing one. Nightmare. Every antagonist we've talked about so far has wanted something. Power, revenge, control, a really nice kingdom. Nightmare doesn't want anything. Nightmare just is. The final boss of Link's Awakening is, and I cannot stress this enough, a Lovecraftian horror entity living inside a Nintendo game about a boy with a sword. It exists as the physical embodiment of chaos within the dream realm of Koholint Island, a creature with no morality, no motivation, and no comprehensible origin. It's not evil the way Ganondorf is evil. It's not even evil the way a natural disaster is evil. It's just a force that exists because the dream exists, the same way darkness exists because light does. And the final battle reflects that perfectly. Nightmare cycles through 6 distinct forms during the fight, each one more grotesque and incomprehensible than the last. It shapeshifts constantly, pulling from different nightmares like it's flipping through a catalog of things that shouldn't exist. The game confirms it possesses intelligence and intent, but never explains what that intent actually is, which is, not ideal. But here's the thing, Nightmare isn't even the scary part of Link's Awakening. The scary part is what happens when you win. Koholint Island is a dream. Every person on it, every shop owner, every kid, every friend you made across the entire game, they only exist inside that dream. Defeating Nightmare means waking the Windfish, and waking the Windfish means every single one of those people ceases to exist, gone, not dead, just erased, like they never happened at all. You don't save the world in Link's Awakening, you destroy it, on purpose, because the only way to win is to accept that none of it was real, even though it felt real to you, and it definitely felt real to them. Nobody talks about this game at parties, I don't know what to tell you, but if Nightmare represents the existential horror of erasing a world, the next entry is what happens when someone willingly paints themselves into oblivion. Yuga. Yuga is what happens when an artist decides the canvas isn't enough. He doesn't just paint, he turns living, breathing people into paintings, trapping them inside frames like trophies in a gallery nobody asked for. And honestly, as far as villain powers go, it's one of the most creative in the entire Zelda franchise. But creativity and wisdom are not the same thing, and Yuga learned that the hard way. On the surface, he's the primary antagonist of A Link Between Worlds, a sorcerer from Lorule with an obsession for beauty and an ego roughly the size of Hyrule Castle. He turns the 7 sages into paintings to use as offerings, generates multiple boss encounters through his art-based magic, and keeps showing up throughout the narrative before his grand finale. The guy is busy. He's productive, he's also catastrophically stupid. Here's where it gets dark. Yuga's entire plan revolves around fusing with Ganon. He resurrects the Demon King specifically so he can merge with him, believing he can absorb that power and use it to reshape the world into his perfect artistic vision. He thinks he's the one in control. He thinks Ganon is the tool. He is wrong. The moment Yuga merges with Ganon, he becomes a vessel for something far bigger than himself. His identity, his ambition, his vanity, all of it gets swallowed by a malice that's been recycling itself for ages. And then his own master, Hilda, tries to claim the Triforce from him, only for Yuga to turn on her too, absorbing her power for himself. himself. The guy betrays literally everyone. Yuga didn't harness Ganon. He just became another link in a chain of power-hungry fools consuming each other. And that's exactly what Yuga was. A vain, ambitious sorcerer who thought his art made him special enough to contain pure evil. The community generally treats him as a minor antagonist, which is fair. He's not exactly Ganondorf, but the thematic weight of what he represents is real. He's proof that the cycle of evil in Zelda operates like a virus, infecting anyone desperate enough for power. Vanity killed Yuga long before Link ever did. But if you think one willing vessel is concerning, wait until you meet the source of the curse itself, Demise. Every antagonist on this list, every puppet, every victim, every self-made monster, every cosmic horror, all of them exist because of one being's dying breath. And that being is Demise. Demise is the Demon King of Skyward Sword, and chronologically, he is the first major antagonist in the entire Zelda timeline. Not the first in release order, the first in existence. He predates Hyrule. He predates civilization. He is ancient evil in its purest, most primordial form, a force of destruction that waged war against the goddess Hylia before recorded history even began. And Link beats him. That's the thing, Link actually wins. Demise falls in a one-on-one duel at the end of Skyward Sword, a fight that takes place in a surreal alternate dimension, complete with lightning strikes you can absorb into your blade. It's an incredible fight, and it should be the end of the story. But here's where it gets cosmic. At the moment of his defeat, Demise doesn't beg. He doesn't bargain. He curses. He tells Link and Zelda that his hatred will follow them forever, that an incarnation of his rage will be reborn again and again to pursue those with the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero across every era. One declaration, one act of pure spite at the exact moment of annihilation, and it works. Every Ganondorf, every Ganon, every incarnation of evil across thousands of years of fictional history is that curse made manifest. Demise isn't just an antagonist, he's the meta-narrative engine of the entire franchise. One dying declaration retroactively explains why the cycle of hero, princess, and demon king repeats endlessly across every single game. Now, the fandom is genuinely split on this. Some players think it's brilliant that knowing every conflict traces back to one source makes the whole tapestry more tragic. Every villain on this list was always going to exist. They never had a choice. Others argue it diminishes everyone else's agency. If Ganondorf is just a curse on autopilot, does his ambition even matter? Does Xant's desperation? Does any of it? I don't think there's a clean answer, but I do think there's something deeply unsettling about a being so hateful that death itself couldn't stop him from ruining everything forever. That's not power. That's spite, elevated to a universal constant. But if Demise is the origin of the cycle, then Calamity Ganon is what happens when that cycle runs so long, the evil stops even pretending to be a person. Calamity, Ganon, every villain we've talked about so far has wanted something. Power, revenge, loyalty, validation. Even the most monstrous ones had a personality driving the destruction. Calamity Ganon wants nothing. It doesn't think, it doesn't scheme, it doesn't monologue, it just consumes. And that might be the scariest thing the Zelda series has ever done. Roughly 10,000 years before Link wakes up in that resurrection shrine, this thing first emerged. Not as a person, not as a king, not even as a recognizable creature. It manifested as a swirling mass of pure malice, a living catastrophe that the ancient Sheikah civilization had to develop an entire technological arsenal just to contain. Guardians, divine beasts, all of it built for one purpose, keep this thing sealed, and it worked for a while. Then, 100 years before the game begins, it broke free again and destroyed everything. Here's what makes Calamity Ganon fundamentally different from everything before it. It doesn't conquer, it infects. It corrupts guardians into killing machines. It spawns blighted versions of itself inside the divine beasts. It leaks malice across the landscape like a wound that won't close, turning environments toxic and creatures hostile. This isn't an army with a general, it's a disease with no cure. The second phase doesn't help either. Dark Beast Ganon emerges as this towering, boar-like horror made entirely of concentrated hatred, and you fight it across Hyrule Field, while Zelda literally begs you to end it. Not defeat it, end it, because even she knows this thing isn't alive in any meaningful sense. Canonically, Calamity Ganon is the result of Ganon's cycle of resurrection, twisted beyond recognition, his hatred and malice endlessly reincarnating, until all that's left is the rage itself. No ambition, no identity, just the malice distilled. And this is where the fanbase splits clean down the middle. Some players think this is brilliant. Evil doesn't need a face. Evil doesn't need motivation. Sometimes evil is just a force that keeps coming back no matter what you do. And that's more terrifying than any speech Ganondorf could give. Others think it's narratively hollow. A purple cloud with no personality isn't a villain, it's a weather event. You can't have dramatic tension with something that has zero interiority. Honestly, both sides have a point, but whether you find it profound or empty, nobody can deny it's oppressive. Every inch of Breath of the Wild's world feels sick because of this thing, which is exactly why it hits different when the series finally puts a face back on the evil Ganondorf. Every antagonist we've covered today has been building to this. The banana-obsessed clan leader, the shadow with no will, the sword that loved its master, the puppet king, the wind mage who stole immortality, the witches fused into one screaming body, the lonely kid behind the mask, the nightmare that was never really alive, the painter who let himself be devoured, the primordial curse, the mindless plague, all of them lead here, to the man standing at the end of every timeline, waiting. Ganondorf is Demise's curse given a face, and that's exactly what makes him more terrifying than Demise ever was. Here's the thing about a mindless curse. It's relentless, but it doesn't think. Calamity Ganon proved that. Strip away the intelligence, the ambition, the personality, and you're left with a cloud of angry malice that can't hold a conversation. Ganondorf is the opposite. He schemes, he manipulates, he waits centuries for the right moment to strike, and when he does, he's already 3 steps ahead. He's appeared across numerous titles and timeline branches, and in almost every single one, he's the smartest person in the room. But Wind Waker changed everything. Standing on that tower, wind blowing through Hyrule one final time, Ganondorf talks about coveting the wind, not power, not the Triforce, the wind. Fans have been arguing about that speech for over 20 years. Some say it proves he deserves empathy, that he's a man shaped by a curse he never asked for, born into a dying desert while Hyrule's fields stayed green. Others say sympathy is the trap, that feeling sorry for him is exactly how he wins. Both sides might be right, which is, not ideal. He possesses shape-shifting abilities, advanced sorcery, and raw combat, prowess spanning centuries. He transforms into the Beast Ganon when strategy fails and sheer apocalyptic force is required. He's been the face of Zelda villainy for nearly 40 years, and none of it was his choice. Demise's curse chose him before he drew his first breath. That's the tragedy at the center of this entire franchise. Zelda's greatest villain might also be its greatest victim. A man with genuine intelligence, genuine longing, permanently enslaved by a cycle he didn't create and can never escape. He will always come back. Link will always rise to meet him, and the curse will never, ever break. Every antagonist in this series exists somewhere on that spectrum between comedy and cosmic horror. Ganondorf sits at the very end, carrying the weight of all of them. Not because he's the strongest, but because he's the one who knows exactly what he is and can't do a single thing about it. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.